I'm gonna turn this on right. There you go. Well, good day, everybody. We're back, Monday Luncheon. We're glad to be here today, and we're glad to have all of you with us. We have a great speaker. Dave Cowan used to be the chair. He's retired. He used to be the chair of the Department of Geography at USC. He was the co-director of the Center for GIS and Remote Sensing at USC. He is now the Carolina Distinguished Professor of Geography. He got his BA and MA from the State University of New York at Buffalo and a PhD in geography from Ohio State in 1970. We're very happy to have him with us. He's going to talk about redlining. I'll let him tell you about it, but he's been doing some research recently on redlining and the history and how that came about and how it worked or didn't work sometimes. And so it's all yours, Dave. We're fairly informal, as you know.
Yeah. Well, good. It's wonderful to be with you. It's always a nice opportunity. I keep saying to my wife that, you know, as long as somebody still cares about what I have to say, then I'm looking for an audience. In fact, in this particular case, I am a consultant for a GIS software company called ESRI, the world leader in this. So for the last 10 years, I've been working. After I retired I retired 14 years ago, so it's been a long time. But for the last 10 years, I'm a consultant for this software company, ESRI. And one of my tasks now is to look at the way that this technology can be supported in an academic environment. And it's moved more from, it's something that we supported out of the geography department for decades. But then now librarians are stepping forward. And there's a lot of there's nice little applications, things that we know as like story maps is a common term now, a way of bundling a bunch of information around some spatial data and publishing it on a website and sharing it with the public. So anyway, I've been consulting with them, but then about a month ago, there's a group of people, chat group or a blog that was had introduced this mapping inequality topic. And so I sort of dug into it and I shared it with Jim. And so I'm going to share more of it with you. So Jim, I can just share my screen here. Okay.
You can. You should be able to right now.
I should be able to. And here we go, maybe. Okay. Mapping inequality, redlining in the New Deal America is the topic of this. And in fact, you can Google for that. Just Google for mapping inequality, and you'll get to a site that has much of the information I'm going to be talking about. So you can do it yourself.
We're not seeing your presentation.
We don't see your slides yet.
Did you share the screen, Jim?
Yeah. We sure did. We did this. We practiced this, and it worked fine. I don't know why. Who knows?
Because
yeah, right. We'll get it.
the
problem
reason
with
for everything,
technology.
because
Yeah, technology is wonderful
When it works.
when it
if
works.
it's not, tell that to Southwest.
Any luck?
Not yet.
Did we lose the speaker?
Well, I think we lost the speaker. He's probably trying to reset and start over, I guess.
How many years have you had Monday lunch going?
I'm
Jim?
sorry.
How many years have you had Monday lunch going?
I think we're on to 42.
Wow.
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 Wow, that's
40
right.
42 years?
42 years, yeah. Can you believe
Wow.
that?
Wow.
I'm only 45, you know.
I was going to say you started when
I know.
you were 10, huh?
Child prodigy.
Yeah, right.
That's a lot of food, Jim.
Yeah, that's a what? What did you call
That's a
it?
lot of food.
A lot of food. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Jim's first
you-
words were spoken over this Monday luncheon group.
Was it always at Nona's and, or did you
No,
start?
Nona's
somewhere else?
doesn't go back that far. We started off on campus at the faculty house, which
Ah.
became McCutcheon House, and we were there for a long time. And it was a smaller group, I might add, but it existed.
So for me, it's luck that Corona came and you do the online meeting now. So
Yeah,
can
right. I mean,
participate.
this is the big plus about a Zoom meeting is we can have these several people that are far away join us. And we're going to hear from Luis actually in a couple of weeks here. He's going to tell us about Peru and what's going on there. If you guys are watching, because everybody's watching,
Okay.
Brazil right now, but Peru was a couple of weeks
Was
ago.
Alfredo Strassner from Peru?
I'm sorry?
Was Alfredo Strassner from Peru?
Stroessner was Paraguay, wasn't he?
Oh, he was Paraguay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at least it began with a P.
Yeah, right. Almost the same thing, right? Yeah. What's the weather like down there, Luis?
Oh, it's summer. It's beautiful. Summertime is hot.
Luis lives on the beach these days, so out one of those windows, he can look at the ocean.
Yes. Well, not as quiet as, I mean, not as nice as Sullivan Island, but
Yeah, well, I
Do you
don't
have
know.
his phone number? Maybe you can call, see what's going on with him.
Yeah, maybe I should do that. Do I have his phone number? Good question. Hmm.
My goodness, was that a flip phone?
Well, yeah, it's a new flip phone. Did you see that?
Don't let him fool you.
Maybe he lost his internet.
I don't know. This
Oh, that's
first
why I
time-
suggested calling him.
I'm trying to find it now. Let me see. This has never happened before, so
No,
I mean, I guess there's
no,
always.
you never
first.
lost a speaker altogether. We certainly had them have trouble with their screen sharing, but
Yeah.
Sorry, the computer died on me. I'm sorry.
Oh, you back? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
no problem. We're patiently waiting.
he, he was just about to call the police.
Yeah, I was calling the police. Go check on David Cowan.
Welfare check.
Yeah. I've clicked the box for multiple sharing, so you should be able to share.
Yeah, yeah. Just a second here.
No problem. We're patient. Somebody could sing. Luis, you could sing for us while we're waiting.
Sure.
Ah, now you got it.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go. It's coming. It's coming now.
I mean, it's coming.
It says that you started screen sharing.
Okay, sorry.
Ah,
There we
there you
go.
go. You got it.
Ta-da.
Okay, so again, quickly, I wanted to talk about this project that has been created actually by librarians at other universities. I want to talk specifically about the Homeowners Loan Corporation between 1935 and 1940 and the creation of what we call a residential security maps. I want to talk about the history of those maps. I want to talk a little bit about GIS conversion of that. Then I want to spend some time and explore Columbia neighborhoods, how this process was enacted in the mid 30s and the comments about specific neighborhoods, and talk a little bit about another project called Mapping Prejudice, talk a little bit about covenants and the evolution of public policy around this issue. So mapping inequality, you can get to it, you can Google for it, and you'll find that a website like this, which is very easy to navigate, and you can choose any of the cities that these maps were created for. The system is, there are 3 teams of people at University of Richmond, Virginia Tech, and University of Maryland who've been working collaboratively on this project. The kind of the basis of this relates to a specific economist or a historian, Kenneth Jackson at Columbia, wrote an article in 1980, Race, Ethnicity, and Real Estate Appraisal, the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Association Administration. He, in fact, went to the National Archives and found these maps. The maps were actually hidden away from public access. So if you want to learn a lot about the project, Kenneth Jackson's article is a wonderful place to start. And again, you can Google for it and find a PDF version of it. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation was part of the New Deal. The idea was established in 1933 under the leadership of Roosevelt. Its purpose was to refinance home mortgages currently in default and prevent foreclosure. This Homeowners Loan Corporation was dissolved in I put that down here, in 1954. Oops. Okay. Kenneth Jackson, so the person who, this historian who found the maps, in the so he started studying these things, and then he wrote an article, then he wrote a book on the subject. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation was the key promoter of redlining and a driver in residential segregation and racial wealth inequality. The idea here is that much of the growth for white America is has been home ownership. Invest in a piece of property, build a house, watch it increase in terms of its value, and essentially establish wealth. But now I thought this was an interesting quote. What slavery was to antebellum period, namely the broad foundation of both American prosperity and racial inequality. Here's some interesting quotes. Jane Jacobs made this comment. Credit blacklisting maps are accurate prophecies because they're self-fulfilling prophecies. We can identify specific areas and say, we're going to loan money in those areas, but we're not going to loan it in other areas. The Homeowners Loan Corporation discriminated against racial and ethnic minorities and against older industrial cities. Roosevelt in 1934 said, the idea was the first to return many of the unemployed to useful and gainful occupation, produce tangible, useful wealth in the form where there is a great social and economic need. Sort of interesting, Congress's view of this. In administering the Housing Guarantee Program, the Veterans Administration adopted FHA residential exclusion programs, also known as redlining. So sort of interesting things. The imbalance between poor people and in favor of middle income homeowners so staggering that it makes all inquiries into the pathology of slums seem redundant. Another person said, no greater instrument for the widening of already huge racial gaps in post-war America than the GI Bill. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. This idea, again, that geography is destiny. If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it's necessary that the properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. So this was sort of federal policy. If we're going to loan money and we want to have a good return on our investment and stability, then we should be aware that we want homogeneous neighborhoods. Obviously, private banking institutions were privy to and influenced by the governments, and these became residential security maps. And from a federal perspective, it created in 239 different cities. They created these maps. And when it was refinanced, 1 million homes with a profit of $14 million to the US Treasury. The Supreme Court did decide that in 1948, that covenants that excluded, or that eliminated, prohibited sale to non-Caucasians were unconstitutional and violated the equal protection provisions under the 14th Amendment. But it's sort of interesting. Some developers said, well, wait a minute, we could put these covenants on our property and encourage restricted residential use, and nothing is really going to happen to us because there's no enforcement of these covenants. So in fact, we had federal policy that sort of allowed discrimination in creating homogeneous neighborhoods, really up to the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which actually prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, desirability, family status, and national origin. So we're going to jump into now these residential security maps. So you got to remember that in this period, right after the Depression, so we're talking 1933-34, okay, the notion was that there was lots of foreclosures taking place. People were struggling, and we wanted to have more home ownership. So what we had to do, they set up a system where individuals would go out and look at neighborhoods and establish a questionnaire and do a survey of what was going on in that neighborhood in terms of the occupation of people, in terms of their income, in terms of the ethnicity of the inhabitants, the type of construction, the price range, and so on. Now, Jackson actually, as I say, found these maps in the National Archives, and he has a major book, Crabgrass Frontier. Crabgrass Frontier talks about the suburbanization of populations in the history of our country. So the idea here was to fill out a form and identify characteristics of a neighborhood, and then you're going to give it a color, a colored green on the maps. And remember, in the 1930s, making large color maps was a bit of a chore. Right? These are large format, 36 by 48 inches, and you got to produce them in color. So you identified a neighborhood. If you scored it an A, then these were deemed minimal risk for banks and mortgage lenders. Those receiving the lowest grade of the D were colored red, and they were considered hazardous. Right? So this notion of scaling things from green to red led to this kind of concept, the importance of redlining. So the criteria for whether a neighborhood was a good bet for home ownership loans, okay, was a set of 8 criteria: the relative economic stability of the people living there, the protection from adverse influences, which could be people not of the same color, freedom from special hazards, adequacy of civic, social, commercial centers, adequacy of the transportation, sufficiency of the utilities, level of taxes, and the appeal. I mean, in a sense, if you had to evaluate what was going on in a neighborhood, you would have used the same kind of criteria. You had to come up with some scale for this. Okay. So these are all the cities in which these residential security maps were created. So what these librarians have been doing is finding the maps, scanning them, then what we call geo-referencing them. So if you see the way the city of Columbia is laid out, we all think that Main Street runs north-south, but in fact it runs northwest to southeast, right? It's about a 17-degree shift. So this is what the map looked like. And you can see in this example here, 9% of the area was considered best and colored green. And B was still desirable, about 20%, definitely declining, the yellow areas, 30%, and hazardous, or 41% of the area or of the neighborhoods, okay, were deemed as hazardous or a bad risk for loaning money. Okay. Now, my profession was a geographic information system, and it's a common technology. You think about Google Maps, think about using the Richland County GIS centers. this is a technology that I grew up with. Been doing it for 54 years, dealing with things like this. So taking the individual maps, scanning them, and then creating what we call polygons, right? So a closed area. So here's the downtown area of Columbia. I've labeled Elmwood and Assembly, Trenham Road, Hayward, Devine. And then here's an actual sheet. So here's somebody would take the sheet of paper and, they would enlist people, property appraisers was a new profession. So it wasn't like there was a group of certified people, you could go ahead and do this. So what you have here for favorable things, attractive layout, and so on. And then it goes on and says, for example, that there's ample money for loans. So you take some sheet like this, I call it, very subjective. Fill out that information, but you can put this information together then, right? So for Columbia, all of the A, B, C, D areas, you can see that there are a number of different neighborhoods. And in some of these neighborhoods, even though they're A, they don't have paved streets. They are vacant lots with not landscaped, or whether they are paved, whether you're attached to the sewer system or not. So let's take a look at a couple of neighborhoods. Here's one you're all familiar with, Forest Hills, right? And so according to the people doing the survey here, rolling wooded area, attractive layout in the area, adds charm and appeal, zoned for residential, highly restricted, especially in the western portion, eastern portion, one-story places. Executives, business, and professional men live in this neighborhood, and with no Black population. So there's a description of Forest Hill. Now you can see, and I've labeled Manning Street, if you're aware of this, going between Gervais and Forest, right? So if you go down Manning Street, you can see the abrupt change in terms of the quality of the neighborhoods. All right, so that's Manning Street, kind of these, and many of the people living in the D area to the right in this case were servants and domestics that would work for the people living in the A area. Here's a Waverly, okay, that area kind of south of Elmwood and going through Millwood. Now this one, the description says, contains the highest type of Negro property in the city. 25 years ago, this small portion of the area was high-grade white property. Several high-class white families, descendants of original owners, still live in the above described area. Wales Garden, many of you are familiar down in the 5 Points area. Little new construction during the war after World War I with high construction costs. Hence, improvements in the area were better designed and were more substantial than those in adjoining areas. So that was a desirable area. That was called Area A2. Around the university in the 30s was kind of an interesting area, right? This area going down to Rosewood and up Park Street. Low-cost slum clearance project is located in the area. Negro vacancy is due primarily to higher rental prices than this group can afford. West of Assembly Street, until now we get into some interesting kind of transition areas, mixture of grades of population, clash of social classes, difficulty of rental collection. None of the streets are paved, and in many instances, toilets connect to the sewer system, 2 or 3 families per toilet. Here's an area some of you were mentioned before I started about Heathwood. So this area kind of north of Devine and west of Kilbourne. Purchasers of vacant lots selected from the the best grade middle-aged group. Zoned for residential, highly restricted, and the area has charm and appeal. Kilbourne and Heathwood. This is sort of an interesting example. Most of the unimproved property area is in strong hands, and the owners use reasonable care and selection of purchasers. The occupations, executives, business, and professional men. Zoned for residential, well restricted, slightly remote though from the community business centers. No sewers, all the streets were unpaved. this area in the mid-1930s. Again, part of that description around Kilbourne Park, ample mortgage funds. Area placed on the market in auction in 1935. You may not be aware of this area, but it's sort of an interesting anomaly. If you go south of Divine Street on Kilbourne, and you go right onto Hayward. Are you familiar with this neighborhood, folks?
They're probably not. It's not a neighborhood you would normally drive through, but you're right. It's right off of Kilburn on the south.
Just the eastern extent of Shandon, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
It's an interesting, so if you go there, this is what the neighborhood looks like. But it's been there. It's a legacy from the earliest 20th century. Premier Place along Hardin Street in Duncan. Zoned for residential, but apartments are permitted. I thought that was kind of interesting. Homogeneity of improvements adds to area's desirability. All streets unpaved and unguttered. Lack of shade trees in the eastern and central portion. Sort of interesting if you got to put yourself, as an individual out there with this form that you had to fill out. Much of it's, just the perception that they're having from the neighborhood. Olympia, and Jim was mentioning before we started that you bought some houses down in this area. Not directly in Olympia, though, were they?
Well, it was very close to Olympia, but they were certainly Olympia kind of houses. It was Evans Street, and they still had the deed restrictions of you cannot sell to Negroes, as they call them.
Yeah. So the entire area is owned by Pacific Mills, and housing units are not rented except to employees of the mill. It's a classic mill village. Here's another area. I wasn't familiar with this term of Bellevue or Wallace Bottom. Of a new term to me. You can see it straddles Elmwood to the west of Bull Street. And so in this area, great detail, one small Negro colony located near the intersection of Scott and Sumter Streets, another located behind a white residence on the north side of Price Street. Few businessmen, mostly skilled mechanics and laborers. Elmwood, my son, their first house was in Elmwood, and it was on Chester Street, and they still use it as a rental area. But it's kind of an interesting enclave, one of the great gentrified neighborhoods of Columbia. And the area contains a number of homes whose construction was far better than average when built, and consequently, they do not deteriorated as quickly as they can be expected. The governor's mansion is nearby, no Negroes, right? Some executives and professional men, majority are salesmen, clerical workers, and skilled mechanics. Premier Place, this is over again. This is in Shandon, Monroe, and Queen. I don't know if I wrote the description of it. Around Benedict College, right? Factory workers, skilled mechanics, average family income of $600 a year. But there were Greeks, Syrians, and Negroes. 90%
infiltration.
Yeah, infiltration. So this area, Greg, kind of east of Bull Street, Mott's Bottom. Was not familiar with that term. Difficulty of rental collection, dilapidated repair conditions of many properties in the area, unsanitary living conditions. Sales prices reached the peak in 27 to 28, and another period. Infiltration of non-foreign born families, Greek, Syrian, Russian Jews predominating, although 90% of it was Black. So it's kind of interesting how some of these forms were filled out. Newman's Field is another area. I'm not particularly familiar with that term, kind of north of Confederate, east of Main Street. No paved streets, no paved sidewalks, gutter, curbing, or guttering. Eastern portion of the area joins the Confederate Veterans Home and the Home for the Blind. I'm not familiar with those. It's sort of near the Bull Street Mental Institution, but anyway, about 5 families. This is the level of detail. About 5 families of Syrians and Greeks located in northern portion of the area. So you can go, if you go to the website, you can go and probe around all of the neighborhoods in Colombia. They've done a remarkable job of piling this data and putting it together. But actually, there's something like 230 cities. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I was sort of interested in what some of the areas look like there. And this little downtown neighborhood, this is, and the description was, this is almost the poorest section in town with all the customary characteristics of an old central area. Though not classified as a slum, appeal is solely to those who can afford no better foreign families. 40% Italians and Hebrews. So I lived up on the northern part of this, right near Lake Ontario. It was just a lower income white area, but totally segregated. There were no black children in my high school or my grammar schools. So the black, and in fact, in the early 30s, not that many black families in Rochester. Okay. So now one of the notions here is that this process led to suburbanization. So if you've got a lot of conflict taking place within the inner city, then the only way you're going to have security is moving out to the suburbs, right? And so you get these nice homogeneous neighborhoods, and the banks love to loan money to those places. Here amid suburban, it's almost like an advertisement for this neighborhood. Here amid a suburban atmosphere and overlooking 2 adjoining golf courses reside the wealthiest of the present generation. Their homes never appear on the market, little for sale or for rent. So, and so that moves me from kind of Colombia and the experiences that we know about here to the north. And we have a different type of kind of segregation taking place there. And the people in the library at the University of Minnesota have done a wonderful job of actually going to individual deeds and looking at covenants. So this is another thing called mapping prejudice. And this talks about covenants, where racial covenants are clauses that were inserted into property deeds to prevent people who were non-white from buying or occupying the land. Okay, so this is the term that was used in many of the deeds in Minneapolis. Any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent were prohibited. Right? So not at any time to, and before 1919, Jews were most often included in the laundry list of objectionable people. So what they've done at the University of Minnesota, they've gotten together 33,000 volunteer hours. They've looked at 80,000 deeds. They scanned them and did some optical character recognition to look for specific words. And they rounded up over 6,000 volunteers to go through deed by deed, right? And if you want to learn more about this, National NPR created a 1-hour documentary called Jim Crow of the North. It's just fascinating video. And so this is part of what you can see that they've outlined specific areas, the Negro section, and so on. And they went through individual, this is my kind of GIS hat. So each one of these red dots represents the center of a particular parcel of land. And all of those had racial covenants associated with them. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the Civil Rights Act of '68 and identifying this issue and the difficulty, in terms of the inequality of the growth of wealth. And so right now, and this was introduced in 2021, co-sponsored by Jim Clyburn, called the GI Bill Restoration Act. Okay? In administering its housing guarantee program, the Veterans Administration adopted the FHA racial exclusion programs, also known as redlining, which excluded a significant number of African Americans from taking full advantage of the housing guarantee program. The GI Bill created substantial economic growth and wealth accumulation for those who could benefit, but discriminatory administration of the program prevented many African Americans and veterans of World War II from enjoying the full economic prosperity of the post-war period. This bill calls for reparation. Now, it was introduced in 2021, sent to committee. It's got 43 sponsors. I doubt it will ever come out of the committee. And there we go. Okay. So sorry jumped around a little bit there, but you got the essence of this. I think you would have fun going to the website and probing around the neighborhoods. But anyway, I was happy to share some of that with you.
We're wide open for questions, guys, or comments or whatever. Dale, I see your hand up.
I referred to my being in the housing business in the 1960s on Bluff Road, and you've reminded me that we had all the houses were built under FHA and VA. Usually the inspector did both, but a lot of our our sales were to veterans. And one day I was down there and checking on a house, and I saw a white lady putting a kid on a school bus, and I thought we had a mixed neighborhood. Turned out she was married to a soldier who was African American. And but then you didn't mention the 235 program, but that was a government program to help people who couldn't make the down payment on a house. And it was, South Carolina was huge because Mitt Romney's father was Secretary of Housing, and he was a Mormon, and we had a lot of Mormon connection here. So South Carolina got a large portion of the 235 money, and it was not, the houses were built poorly. Many of them were foreclosed. So that probably added to mortgage companies not wanting to take on those neighborhoods where the 235 houses were built. But a few people, managed to keep their house up and make the payments and succeed. But in the mortgage business, I was told that they don't really lend to the house, they lend to the individual. They're not interested in foreclosing houses and
That's
putting them in their...
the major shift that's taking place here.
Okay. Yeah. And when I go for a loan, I bought a lot of property in Beaufort, and I never met the banker. She just went with my financial statement over the phone. It didn't matter what I wanted to borrow. She approved it right on the phone. And obviously she wasn't lending to the property, but she wouldn't exactly say that, but she said I was buying the property so reasonable, there was no doubt in her mind that it would be good. But she was really relying on me to pay it back, not foreclose the property.
Well, if you foreclose on a property, you generally end up selling it for lesser value than what the bank has in it. And that's why banks, first of all, don't want to take it back. Second of all, you've got to actually have a team of people to manage that, because it becomes a separate asset from your books. And so it's really a cost that you didn't have before when the people were servicing their loans correctly. And so all of a sudden you got something now you got to pay in addition to. The bank doesn't make as much money. So it's all about money making.
It's even more critical. In 2008 in Orlando, there were 20,000 houses for sale, because I had to sell a house in Orlando in 2008. With 20,000 houses on the market, a realtor wouldn't even show a house if it wasn't priced at foreclosure price, because they said once there's 2 houses in the neighborhood that are foreclosed, the appraisers go with those 2 prices. And that means every house in the neighborhood is underwater. Suddenly, all the people that are paying their mortgage and enjoying their house, the appraiser still considers it to be that their mortgage is greater than the underlying value.
Robert's, Barbara, I'll get you next. Robert's trying to say something.
Yeah, I've got a question. When I see all these new developments or new neighborhoods come in, and the houses are look like they're 10 feet apart. They're, you know, it seems to me that they're just in another 20 years, this is just going to be there's not going to be much there. I mean, you know, things are so on top of one another. You know, I'd be curious to hear what other people think about that. I mean, I see a lot of that over here in Lexington County, and it's like, wait a minute, those are slums that are waiting to happen. It's just going to take another 15, 20 years before that occurs. And it won't anyway.
What you've got are developers influencing zoning and planning commissions to allow them to do a higher density on a tract of land than you would normally have. And the reason is, the more houses I build, the more money I make. And planning commissions generally will, and councils have the final say so when it comes, that tract of land comes before them for the final approval. But many of those are done under what they call development agreements. And you have so many acres, and nowadays they require so much green space to be allocated in those agreements. How many homes can be built, the size of the footprints, whether or not they have to have sidewalks, roads, and all those kinds of things that never used to be included in the agreements, now today are part of those. And what used to take maybe a year, maybe two to do, sometimes will take 2, 3, 4 years because of the complexity and the various criteria that are included in those development agreements.
Is that county driven or state driven?
It's county driven. Now, you have some counties in this state that have no zoning at all. I think up in Spartanburg, you have areas with no zoning. So what you've done is you've allowed development to come to your communities, and you do that. The state requires a 5 and a 10-year master plan for all communities. And what they do is then through GIS, they will publish a 5-year plan, or they'll publish a 10-year plan that's updated every 5 years. And basically what it does, it projects where your residential is going to go, your industrial, your commercial, your excuse me, your retail. All these are considered part of master planning. And you adjust those according to what the population and the needs of the community are. And that can get sort of tricky, like in Blythewood, where I live. Every time you turn around, another 40-acre tract is sold, and you got more houses going up. But we don't have the road infrastructure to accommodate that, like you're finding in Lexington County. And so this is one of the things that we have to, I think, get our arms around. But so far, developers are winning out and not the people.
But you know, I would add, Robert, you know, density is a value judgment. You know, in northern urban areas or more dense urban areas, you have 0 lot lines. So, I mean, you know, that's a value judgment. And that's coming from Lexington County. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just how you view it.
Yeah, I think that they've got it set up now. You know, now that so many of these have come in, they finally said, okay, you need to have at least a half an acre per home, unless, you know, it's going to be apartments or something along those lines. I don't know, but it just, this is away from the red line stuff, so I'll hush up.
Well, Barbara, let's go. You have a question, I think.
Yeah, I do. First of all, in full disclosure, I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which is in the north and is one of the most segregated cities in the world. And I mean, I've read scholarly articles about that. It's not just my opinion. And I was thinking about how that all worked out. And there was a developer, there were a lot of blue collar jobs that were very high paying in Gary, Indiana when I was growing up. And there was a large Black population that was mostly in the middle of the city. And there was a developer whose name was Hutchin Upshaw, who did that. And I was wondering how they dealt with that sort of thing in this HOLC project. Also, I was just wondering if any of that information was available and used, if you happen to know, in the Brown versus Board of Education case. Thanks. Just a couple of simple questions.
I think those are to you, Dave.
Oh, well, I don't profess to be an expert about housing issues. I came in this from a technology viewpoint, but I am certainly interested in those issues. I think that the notion here of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was all part of the civil rights groups, and in some of the reading that I did, there was reference to Brown versus Board of Education, that a lot, what we've done is separate people, and we make the black people walk through white neighborhoods to get to a school. Actually, I was interested in looking at that area around the university, to the west of the university, and talking about the description of that being almost a slum, and people of having difficulty paying their rent, and not having access to the toilets and sewer systems. It's been remarkable to see. Asia Wilson, remember when they had the dedication of her statue, she talked about her grandmother, right, not being able to walk through the university and having to walk around all the way around the university to get to where she was going. So, there are other examples. Philadelphia is an example where researchers have really kind of dug into this a little further. So let's say this is what the situation was in 1935, right? Because it's really just a very short period of time in which these residential security maps were made. And then trying to follow that up, because now with GIS, we can go to every individual parcel and look at its land ownership records and last sales prices and all of that information. So we can see whether in fact the decisions made in the mid-30s have impacted the future generations. So that's an area of study right now. A lot of that work is focused in Philadelphia.
Well, I want to jump in. You're talking about Columbia. Let me mention that, all the property between Assembly Street and the river over there was the non-commercial property was at one time mostly African-American and low income. And so that was all cleared, over the years that's been cleared, as was Wheeler Hill, if you remember Wheeler Hill. So what they've effectively done is to wipe those neighborhoods out completely to in certain areas that they considered to be slum or low income or whatever. And they were mostly African-American neighborhoods.
But Jim, the city then comes in and rezone those for new development. And a lot of that new development is high density residential, things like that bring a stronger tax base to the city than if you would do just standard residential development.
Absolutely.
You get a return of, I'd say $1.13, maybe even 15 cents on every commercial bit of infrastructure you do versus 87 cents on residential. So there's a reason why cities will lean towards doing high density things and shy away from more houses, particularly in downtown areas.
Well, David, there's an interesting interplay here between the economic side of the issue that you're talking about, Ed, and the ethnic, racial issues that are being talked about. I mean, there's an interplay because the banks were, of course, on the economic side, and they may have been on both sides, but they were definitely on the economic side of it.
Well, that's why you'll see when I was on the library board, the people next door, or somebody wanted to buy that lot next door to build student housing, a high-rise, high-density residential. and there was a black barber shop that sat right on the corner of Lady and Assembly, and a lot of people remember that. That was held by a black family. They did not want to sell it because they saw the value of that small piece of property. And eventually, through different means, I guess, people talking to people and various people in the black community would come to them and say, you really need to sell it now because that price may not be as much as it is today. They eventually relented and sold that property. And that's how they finally put that whole tract together. And so sometimes, you know, just what goes on around you forces you to do things because everything is cyclic. What may be up today may be down tomorrow.
Larry, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I see a couple of things. And some of it was just alluded to, the whole gentrification issue, which I suppose is economically beneficial to, you know, it's a tax base and so on. But then the other issue, the safety issue, you know, we're talking about clearing the African American. Jim was just talking about that. There's that colony apartment business right now. And then before that, what was it? The whatever it is, gardens there, that area. There was actually a lot of safety and crime issues, and also danger from the gas and so on. And those were some of the reasons that those areas were cleared out. You know, so I mean, there's just a whole lot of factors there. I don't know how much, you know, in terms of the changing demographics, and, you know, whether you want to discuss that at all about, you know, poor becoming rich and rich becoming poor. You know, there are a lot of factors. I don't know if you want to address that at all, the speaker.
That's sort of out of my specialty, so I'd like to stay out of that.
John McNutt, you have your hand up.
Okay.
You're muted, John.
Okay, sorry about that. There's a book that Sarah Williams published probably 2 years ago. One of the arguments that she makes is that the original data collection was not exactly done for urban planning, was not done for pro-social things, but it was in a lot of ways conducted to ensure inequality. But it seems like a nice fit with with the work that you're involved in. I put the thing in the chat.
Yeah, down in the chat, David, there are several links. I don't know what they all are, but they're links. Well, there's this, you know, this whole thing about equality and inequality is all, you know, connected to these economic issues. And so people hide behind the economic issues, or, I mean, that's one way to put it, or they consider the economic issues more important.
Yeah, the city beautiful is keeping the wrong people out of it.
Yeah, right. That's right.
So my question about the redlining is, so do you think this is just all part of a Jim Crow? You know, it's sort of a leftover from Jim Crow. And that's and put in, as Jim just said, in economic, you know, to justify. Is you know, I certainly have heard it said that one of the reasons that Jim Crow was allowed was because the South was not punished. You know, and you say that to anybody from Columbia and they'll say, now, wait a minute, they burned down our city. But, you know, hold on, you know, after, you know, when you have the president of the southern states, you know, gets let out after 2 years, you know, when the generals, which are some, you know, are pretty much sort of let scot-free. I mean, if you look what happened after in Germany after World War II, it was like, no, we're not going to allow, you know, any Nazi flags. Oh, do we see rebel flags around still today? Saw one just yesterday. I mean, you know, so is this, you know, my question to you about these maps?
There's just as much redlining in the north.
Right?
Well,
Yeah.
or more.
Absolutely. That's completely true. I mean, segregation is at least as bad in the north as it is in the south.
But it wasn't always African American either.
Oh, right.
Correct.
what was that from? What do you, when you know, yes, there was, but what do you attribute that to?
I don't, if somebody has to jump in to answer that question, I don't know.
Oh, it's prejudice
Well, I mean,
everywhere.
you know, it's, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey and white flight was going on when I was a little kid, and you could see that in the town I grew up in, all the white people moved out to the suburbs. And actually what's happened since then is the suburbs, several of the suburbs have become largely African American. And you have a huge Latino community moving in. But you know, it's bigotry. There really isn't a whole lot of other word for it.
I grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis, and you were talking about Minneapolis. I had no minority students in my school when I graduated. We had one Jewish student, that was it. And I'd never been exposed to any of that discrimination, racism until I joined the Army. And then it faced me because I was assigned a black battle buddy, as we called him, and every place I went, he went. So they would treat me pretty much as they would treat him. And if they didn't want him in their drinking establishment or their restaurant, whatever, I didn't get to go in because I was of the same status as he was. So that was a shocker to me, because I just didn't, I was not aware. I guess I was aware of it, but until you have to actually face some of that, and if you grow up with it, I know some people that accept it for what it is. Some people say my black playing buddy was just as, we were as close together as two peas in a pod. You know, I don't think there is an answer, except maybe we all have some type of inborn racism to us that we learn early on as we grow to condition our thought process to say, I like this or I don't like it.
This is different, that is not.
Jim, I think that, you know, as white Anglo-Saxon Protestant supremacy is, it's the tribalism of America. I don't know what it's like in Peru or Germany, but I do know it's prevalent here. And if you have a nice Anglo-Saxon name and you look white, it's a lot easier to get along than if your name is Milosevic and you are trying to make your way in a, you know, at Harvard. And I mean, it's just true. And it's tribalism, and it's that innate judging of people, of, you know, being afraid when you see a black person, or just, it's just doesn't make sense, but it's the way I think we've all been socialized. I suspect that it's socialized. I don't believe it's hardwired anywhere. I think it's just socialized. And that, you know, we hopefully become smart enough to realize that it doesn't matter what your ethnic group is. The question is what's in your brain and in your heart.
Right.
But don't you think integrating the school system takes us way down that road?
It would be if we integrated them, yeah.
Well, I mean, to some extent they are integrated, but I agree that they're not fully integrated. There's no question about that.
I went to a school, I had, there were, I had Jewish kids around me. I had Hispanic kids around me. And I was totally unaware that there was anything going on that was discriminatory. But I went to a reunion and I got some feedback in conversation with people and discovered that there was some difficulties. And I also had managed to suppress in my mind a Puerto Rican kid came to school, and we had lots of Hispanic kids in my class. One of them, I think, was a class president. Okay. But this kid had what some people would say were Negroid features. And he was a little kid. He was physically small for his age and sex. And he got beaten up and he just disappeared and we never saw him again. And I just think that was just, that was just part of the covert racism that I grew up with. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood. I always thought was totally 100% white, but I recently found out that there was a cemetery there, and that the caretaker of the cemetery and his family actually lived there, and they happened to be Black. And I wonder how they got along. I mean, I really, it couldn't have been easy. Because I wasn't used to going into grocery stores and seeing Black people there.
I guess if you wanted to, you could take it back before slavery and say, what was our country established on? Well, there was some red folks here who had a nation.
Correct.
And we came in and took it away, said, okay, have a little disease and have a little whiskey and all that good stuff.
We didn't want to pay for the French and Indian Wars, so we revolted.
Jim, so what does this group think about the prospects for the GI Bill Restoration Act, which is going to pay reparations to the families of Black World War II soldiers? Any
Whoa.
chance?
I have no idea. We'll have to ask them. That's reparations are an explosive issue.
Absolutely.
In my extended family, I have a person who just gets rabid and froths at the mouth when on the whole issue of people being given anything. I had to work for it, and I don't want anybody to be given anything. And to me, it's like, you don't understand, something was taken away. And
the argument is that the GI Bill promoted programs that for white veterans, but not for Black veterans. I was trying to look to my notes here. In Mississippi, I believe this was the number, 2 VA loans were given to Black people out of 200,000.
Wow.
Wow.
So the whole my wife grew up on Long Island, and her father was a GI. Her father was able to move from Brooklyn and move out to not to Levittown, but an area like that, right? And there was one thing that I was reading about a guy with a GI Bill. He was living in an apartment in Brooklyn, and he moved out to Levittown. Okay, and his mortgage, insurance, and taxes were a total of $29 a month. Okay, and then those houses, right after World War II, those houses are now $300,000 or more, right? Mm-hmm. But the Black folks were not allowed to take advantage of that. So it's this income inequality that's resulted from these discriminatory processes. And again, the Jackson book about Crabtree Frontier, federal policy that promoted suburbanization. Give up on the intercities and move to.
How did they justify, and I apologize if I missed it, excluding the Black people from the GI Bill payments?
I'm not an expert on it, but it's wide open. That's a very relevant question.
It was done. That was the
It was
custom.
done. It was just.
It was just done.
So they just said, sorry, we're not giving it to you without having any excuse.
Yeah, and also, that if you've ever applied for a government loan or anything, the amount of bureaucracy there is tremendous. If nobody's helping you with it, you can easily be shuttled aside.
Yeah.
But remember in 1948, we had rampant segregation. I mean, everything was segregated. So it wouldn't have been considered very unusual to do that, to exclude certain people.
Correct. That would be just, well, of course, yeah. We're not, why would we?
Just the way it is.
Jim, I'm going to have to leave.
Yes, certainly, Dave. Yeah, that was great. We didn't expect you to solve all these problems or answer all these questions, but it was
Yes, we
great.
did.
I encourage you to look at that website. It's very well done. And you got 231 cities you can go look at it. I mean, it was fairly remarkable, right? This historian, Jackson, he found those maps. They were basically hidden away in the National Archives.
Before you go, what was the date of the least, the most recent of those maps? Most of them you were referring to were in.
Yeah, it was mid-30s,
Okay.
1935, only for a period of 3 or 4 years.
Nearly 100 years, pushing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes us feel a little bit better, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
A lot of stuff is kept, like the census is kept confidential for a certain number of years, because right now you're able to look at some of the censuses from earlier times in the last century, but there's probably still a lot of other records we're never going to be able to find until later.
Thank you, Dave.
Folks. Nice
Thank you.
chatting with you.
Thank you very much.
you.
Dale, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the VA. Those were not loans from the government. All the government did was guarantee private lenders. So the private lenders could, have discriminated because they felt like they couldn't collect the monthly payments, and therefore would be hurt because they would have to then go to the government for the guarantee reimbursement, a lot of paperwork, probably lose money. Because I know we made VA loans to a lot of Black people in our little community that we built. And most of them were ministers, or they worked at a hospital, or they did something. And I'm sure some probably got foreclosed if they lost their job, but that could create a lot of pain for the lender. Or at least that's my perception.
The converse was interesting with the credit default swap business, where they would loan money to anybody. The $1 million house to a cleaning lady, and the people that gave it to them just didn't care. They just put it up, it would get up and up and up. And then when the housing market started to drop a little, there was that huge.
That was the bubble.
I think they were called fire mortgages, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liar's mortgages were
Liar
huge.
buyers, yeah, they just made it up, anybody could.
Yeah, they did their own appraisals.
That
and
didn't work out well for the economy, did it?
No, I happen to know some people who became mortgage lenders. They had zero experience, no education in business. They were just 23-year-olds, and they went out and made home loans to anyone and everyone. And actually, I received some of those. They were very good, lucrative.
You know, the whole issue of appraisers and what appraisers do has come up, and you and I both know, several of you, that the whole appraisal industry business is very, very, very subjective.
True. And those liar's loans were often interest only at very low rates, like 3 or 4%. And my family got several of those loans back in the hot days, and we
Those
paid them
were-
all off. But we got
Also-
deals.
Dale, there were also a lot of those, I can't think of the name of it. You're gonna have to help me with the word finding here. But the mortgages where the interest rate goes up, you know.
Adjustable
Oh,
rate.
yeah,
mortgage.
variable.
Adjustable rate, yeah, and you adjust yourself right out of the whatever. My
Exactly.
my
Yeah.
former first husband signed up for one of those, and fortunately, my name was never on that mortgage, thank God.
Lucky you.
Well, yeah, I know a house that I had in 74. It had some really, I remember, crazy high interest rate. At one point, the interest rates for a while were just like, 10% or something, or
Well, the
more.
prime rate was 14% at one time. I still have the video where the evening news showed the prime rate at 14% on the screen. And I built 10 condos during the 10 to 13% interest time frame, and fortunately could refinance them for 9% right after the economy crashed. But America's pretty bad about craziness. But when my children in Atlanta could buy a condo, and with interest only monthly payments, it would be less than the rent they were paying. So they all bought condos for these. They didn't have to make any equity payment on the loan at all, just pay the interest. And it was pretty nice. And they all sold them at a nice profit later. So part of their net worth came from these crazy loans they made there for a while.
But then when they crashed in 2008, people were just walking away from the houses.
I was there. I walked away from one by selling it for almost half of what I paid for it. But I didn't default on anything. I just sold it for half of what I paid for it. So housing doesn't always go up.
Well, I know the Canadians did really well with that because they didn't have that same thing, and they bought a lot of properties in Florida right after that crash in 2008.
A Canadian bought my property in Florida. You're exactly right. He paid cash for my property in Florida and got such a good deal on it.
When my parents weren't allowed to buy that property in Heathwood, they built a house on Saluda Avenue. And if you went down Saluda Avenue, when you reached Wheat Street, from Wheat Street to the university, it was all black shacks. Ed Yargin made a fortune painting pictures of those black shacks. Well, they tore those shacks down. They told the people who lived there, we're going to improve this area. And they built Wheeler Hill, but they told the people who had lived there, you'll be able to live in nicer homes. Well, of course, there was no way they could afford the houses in Wheeler Hill.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, real estate is it's been a big wealth builder for most Americans. I think I've read that something like half of America's net worth is in their houses. That's not true around the world, but it's true here. If you could get your appraised value for your house, you probably have a nice profit there.
Well, my parents built a house in Los Angeles in 1954 for $20,000. And that house now goes for 2 million. If you look at Zillow,
Yeah.
1,200 square feet.
And
Wow.
that's the problem. Everybody didn't get to to have a house when you could do it for $20,000. So they didn't have that asset
Right.
going forward. And it's
That's
still not right.
That is correct. They didn't have access, or not only didn't they have access to buy it, they didn't probably have the income to make the payments.
Right.
Right.
So it's a combination of discrimination by race, perhaps, or
Oh,
ethnic.
no, not perhaps.
But
Not
it was
perhaps,
also,
yeah, right.
also it was discrimination by monthly payment. You know, we had like the house I told you that we built for my employee. We built it for $2,500, and he had a hard time making the payments out of his paycheck. We paid $300 for the lot. I think we built the house for $2,500 or less, and but it's still, you know, it's a combination of everything. But economic discrimination is just as strong as racial discrimination. Maybe they're the same.
I have a related question. What does this group think is going to happen with the border situation in Texas and Arizona? You know, with all the folks that are coming in, what do you think? I'd just like to hear some little while we're talking about discrimination. I mean, you know, those poor people. Holy smokes!
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
just
if
ship
they're
them to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
Well, if they're hardworking, they will probably find jobs rather quickly. If the trouble is with their illegality, it's going to be hard for them to get hired. But the meatpacking industry uses almost exclusively immigrants.
Meat and turkey.
Who can afford to buy meat anymore?
Well, you know, the insanity of what you're asking about, Robert, is that, you know, all they'd have to do, Congress sit down and craft a bill that would allow people to come in and work and not necessarily become citizens, but they would have a citizen route if they wanted to take it. But it's they're logical solutions to this whole thing, but they won't do it.
Well,
Well-
they certainly did that during World War II. They, you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
everybody was going away, they said, "Hey, come on up here. We need you to work."
Yeah, sure.
Well,
We needed the labor for many, many
Well,
years.
the
still
orange
need the
pickers
labor.
in California, and actually when I was in Wisconsin, there was a foundry that was all Mexican, you know, immigrants.
But they
Well,
won't sit down and do it because the Republicans on one side, some of the Republicans, they make a lot of money because of these being illegal immigrants, and so they don't want to change the law, and so you get the stalemate where you can't reach a reasonable solution to this. But there's a solution out there. It's not even complicated.
Not
But-
complicated. I was in Singapore, and there's a whole lot of immigrants there, but they're on something like a green card, and they can work 2 years, and then they have
Yeah.
to go back to Malaysia for 6 to 8 months, and then they can come back. But they work very well because they want to have a good 5-star rating on their green card, so they'll be eligible to come back after they've been away for a while. And I guess eventually some of them apply for citizenship because they speak the same language. But it could be, as you say, it could be worked out. It's just politically, nobody seems willing to take even a first step.
Well,
Well,
that's
even
because
worse than that,
too
they're
many
able to
people-
use that political issue to run
Right.
for office, and that you know, that's another.
They're
problem.
also using peonage to continue to become wealthy at the expense of other people.
Yeah,
without-
absolutely, absolutely.
It's peonage. It's slavery written with another name. It's this very
another
strange
name. Well, I don't think many people realize this, but I have in-law relatives that are farmers here in South Carolina, and their workers are screened in Mexico by the government, given physical exams and everything. And the Mexican government sends them here in a bus, and the US government requires them to be paid $9 an hour plus overtime for working on the farm. And they are here on a limited basis. They get to go back and, come back and forth. But they do all of the crops, picking vegetables and do all that kind of stuff. But they have to provide safe housing. I've seen the housing. They have barbecue pits, and they have it's like a Walmart on wheels that comes in, but everything in there is sold in, pesos or something. I don't know. Anyway, they hang clothes out and they put clothes racks out, and they can select clothes to buy and choose and everything, but they don't usually leave the reservation, or the, worker housing. They pretty much stay in the worker housing. And, but they're paid pretty well. They have to keep elaborate records of every hour they work and everything. And same thing in Ridge Spring, South Carolina. We're the peach capital of the South in Ridge Spring. And they have these same workers that are come in officially sanctioned by the US and Mexican governments both.
If you are a farmer, you have to say, I want these folks from this time to this time. And if you want it extended, you have to go back, blah, 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 and get so, I mean, it's like, ooh, it's not easy to be a farmer anymore.
No, and they have to advertise the jobs and then report that no Americans applied.
Well, yeah, but if you just use illegals, you don't have to pay them $9 an hour. You pay them $3 an hour.
Oh yeah,
they're illegal, and people get away with that every day.
Well, in Texas, the illegals on private property are very seldom arrested. So I had a friend who had illegals on his private property in Texas, and he had to do their grocery shopping because they couldn't go to town to a grocery store. But they cooked their food, but they gave him his shopping list and he went and bought the food. And but he had them for 25 years, different ones.
Well, the system is broken. It's clearly broken, but nobody wants to fix it.
No, they don't.
Why would we want to fix it, though?
Why do you want to fix it? Is that what you said?
Well, I mean, there's good instrumental reasons for fixing it, but it's a great political issue for the Republicans. They're not going to walk away from this.
That's my point. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody like me will point out, they had complete control of the Congress, they had the president, the whole 9 yards, and they still did nothing about it.
They didn't do anything about it. No, absolutely not.
Absolutely nothing. They didn't even propose a bill, as best I can tell. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
Yeah, in America, we have so many explosive social issues that practical issues just get pushed aside. It's I don't know. We're socially driven at the moment.
Well, it seems to me this is a topic for another Monday Luncheon Group.
it is.
This is way too deep for a few comments.
Well, yeah, we're way down now. We need to climb out,
climb out and
close out. And
yeah,
Jim, did you mention the trip to Biltmore?
Oh, let's do mention that. We've sent that out. Everybody should have gotten a copy of the Dale's putting together. I noticed I said that Dale's putting this trip to Biltmore together, and we'd love for everybody to go. And there are many options on how you do it. So the options relate to cost, because you could just go up the morning of the tour and spend the day and come back, or you could go. We're trying to put together some people that want to go up the night before, and so forth and so forth. I've sent that out to everybody. I think everybody should have gotten a copy of it. So you would have seen what we're trying to put together. It's just a trip to Biltmore.
What's the date of that?
February the 9th is the tour.
February 8th is the hotel, but Jim's found a fabulous boutique hotel, and we can get a very good rate provided we can get 8 rooms. We're a little short now, so if anybody wants to jump in and get one of the discounted rooms, we would like to do that, because we've got to release those rooms if we don't get 8 commitments. I suggest that Jim have a Zoom meeting for those that are interested, and we'll just talk about the options for the 9th and the options for the hotel, but it'd be just for those that were interested in going, and it'll be a special Zoom meeting.
Yeah, and we could be more than 8. It doesn't, we're not limited to 8. It's just that to get the first special rate would require 8. Also, they're like the afternoon tours, the house, but in the morning you could do the greenhouse tour, garden and greenhouse and winery and all that, or you could do the rooftop tour, or you could do the servants. What I don't think I have the right word.
Backstairs tour.
Back room, they call it tour.
Back room tour.
So you have all those choices and they have different price tags on each one.
Jim,
Yes.
while you're selling the rooftop, remind people that there's 7,500 steps they need to climb to get to the roof. And no escalators or elevators.
Yeah, that's the drawback to the rooftop. The 250 steps plus the last 10, which are straight up. And so if you're scared of heights or claustrophobic or can't walk up the stairs, the rooftop tour is not recommended.
I will tell my husband about that. I'm sure when he finds out that there's 200 steps, he'll be all for it.
Yeah, right.
And I'm serious because he loves to take pictures of me taking the last step.
Okay.
Well, there's 240 steps, and the last 7 or 8 are steeper than the others. The rest are normal, I think. We will have a private guide to talk about the architecture and construction if he's interested in that.
And by the way, Luis and Lena and John, y'all are certainly welcome to join us, but it may be a little bit more expensive for you to participate.
I would love to.
Yeah, it's a dramatic property. There's many books written on it, and the family that built it were supposed to be on the Titanic, but they got there late and it had already left, but their butler got on the Titanic, but he never got off. He went down with the Titanic. So it's a very fascinating story. There may not have been this house had they made that Titanic trip or something later. Maybe that happened later. Actually, I guess it did happen later. I don't know.
Dale, you told me, I think this was the younger brother of George Vanderbilt that built this house, and he really didn't do anything except play around, and so he had this house.
Well, he was, Harry, the Prince Harry has got a book out called Spare, because he's the spare child.
Right.
Well, this was the spare Vanderbilt child. All the other Vanderbilt boys were engaged in the business, and they didn't want him in the business. So he was a leftover child, and he and his mother toured Europe for a number of years, and he fascinated by the architecture of those castles, and he built a castle like Europe using European workers, by the way. And so we have a little bit of Europe right here in North Carolina.
Well, right there in North Carolina. But,
Thank you.
but this house is it's supposedly a copy of they had an architect, and of course it's American done and all that, but it's a copy of a French chateau. And so it's a rather massive, I think I saw somewhere on the internet, it's the largest private residence in the country.
It is. I think
If you count every room, Jim, they have
I'm sorry?
300 rooms. That
300.
includes all the kitchens and the bakeries and stuff like that. It's 300 rooms. It's got an Olympic-sized pool in the basement.
Yeah, it's an incredible house. And he really never lived in it. He built it and I think stayed there a few times. And
No, I think they went there every summer.
did they?
It was their summer residence.
That part, I'm just, it's just hearsay.
Well, he was an early ecologist, and Frederick Law Olmsted was hired to convert this horrible land had been over-farmed and ruined, and Frederick Law Olmsted came up with the restoration plan that presents what we see today, which all those trees were planted, and they were planted specifically. They had like 40 weather stations on the property, and they planted a tree that would grow best at the weather at that particular spot. So it was
I
very
need that guy
scientific.
For my house.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating how Frederick Law Olmsted didn't have any education in ecology, but became one of the most noted ecologists. I think I'm going to write a book someday about that. Some of the most creative people in America didn't get their creativity by going to a four-year university. It just
No.
came from within.
Well,
And,
let me say, Dale, that we put Monday as the deadline to let us know. So I should have said this earlier when there were more
Well-
people, but if you're interested, please let us know today so we can.
or tomorrow at the latest.
Or tomorrow at the latest, yeah, so we can
And
package.
then we'll make a decision and have a Zoom meeting with those that want to go. And, or even interested in going, we'll have a Zoom meeting maybe Wednesday or Thursday or something. And so anyway, that would just be my suggestion. I have been before, maybe a couple times, but I'm anxious to go again.
This is educational and fun, so,
Mhm.
Okay, guys, that's it. So
Thank you.
enjoyed it. We'll
That
see you
was
next Monday, I
fascinating.
hope.
Thank
That
you.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us, you guys, Lena and Luis.
Lena, good to
Yeah.
see you.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.